welcome to Brother Owl's Garden. Today's topic is a real big one, and I've been contemplating doing this topic for several months, mostly in response to everything that we can see happening within humanity, within the world these days. And I believe that this is a topic that, although it might be averse to some people and it might be unpleasant to some people, it is very timely and very necessary to discuss. And so today is a conversation about evil, and a conversation that is composed of the offerings of 5 different people, myself and 4 very courageous and spiritually powerful invited guests. Those guests are Deng Ming-Dao, Sadiq Alam, Bob Belcher, and Kiara Windrider. So we're covering United States, Thailand, Hawaii, Bangladesh, and India geographically with this conversation. Now, right up front, I am not in any way insinuating, implying, or claiming to package up neatly and resolve this whole issue, nor even define completely all of the issue of evil. Rather, we are addressing it. Some of the views that are shared here and offered, you may not like, but they may be true. Some you may like very much, but they may not be as on target as others. But you will receive and process what is shared in this video as you will, which is your free will right to do. Like it or lump it, accept it, reject it, adapt it into your life, or dismiss it away from your life. Up to you. This episode on evil is our collective offering for your consideration, for you to receive and process and incorporate into your life and your consciousness as you so freely choose to do. Dealing with evil. Well, what I will offer you about evil is this: evil creates absolutely nothing. Evil only contaminates, skews, perverts, corrupts, manipulates, and destroys. Evil usurps and misdirects your free will. Divinity never does. If something is attempting to hijack, commandeer, usurp, or manipulate your free will, it is coming from evil, not the divine. Evil itself is a perverted inversion of the divine flow of creation. The word evil spells live or live backwards. It's live in reverse. Divinity and source, God, is the source of all power, but evil feeds on your power and is dependent upon you allowing it in your life and feeding it continuously for it to endure. Evil does not respect your free will, it usurps it. Evil feeds on fear, and whatever energy you feed it via obsession, worry, fear, attention, etc. The adverse energy from negative emotions and conflicts and contention and actions that evil entities feed on is called loosh, L-O-O-S-H. That is the contentious, angry, stress, strife energy that evil entities feed on. And if they find a good place to feed they will. And if they find a place that they can rile up and stir up and create more of that luge, more will feed on it. So if you are living in a household of strife, contention, fighting, arguing, resentment, hatred, all of those negative energies and emotions that are being cast at the members of the household, you may be attracting impure entities, and you may be feeding impure entities that have already found it. And again, they also will then manipulate all of the people in the household to stir that up and feed more. Now, most people are mostly good most of the time. That's what I've found from traveling for many years to many countries. Most people are mostly good most of the time. But in the dualistic realms, evil is real. And whether you believe there is an evil entity that influences us through our minds and desires and weaknesses, or you don't believe that, there most certainly are people who do evil. Much of it is too repulsive to even imagine. It is we humans who are indeed the very battleground between these dualistic forces dwelling within us, and which by our free will we choose to either feed or starve. Perhaps the notion that there is God and there is me is also dualistic. But when dualism is transcended by Advaita consciousness, that duality and its illusory divisions disintegrate, and we see and return to oneness. As my buddies Bob and Ed said in a conversation years ago, brother Eddie says, it's all about love. And Bob says, yeah, but what about evil, Ed? And Ed says, not enough love. Now, you may think that that's an oversimplification, but it's actually a fundamental aspect of understanding evil. Not enough love. That is not to have pity or compassion per se to evil or even evildoers, but it is a snapshot of peeking into the essence and nature of what evil is. If it's all about love, then what is evil? Not enough love. To some extent, the disbelief in evil reflects a disbelief in God for those that may believe evil is not a real thing. This reflects a disconnection to self, capital S, self, moving toward a separate self, a small s, ego, intellectual entity. Moving toward a separate self fosters evil. Moving towards divine self, capital S, fosters harmony. Disconnect, ignorance, delusion, and false beliefs foster evil. Evil is a self-allowed or self-created absence or disconnection from divine love. I believe our capacity for evil is equal to our capacity for good. I believe that the holiest saint has the capacity to be the most evil demon, and the most evil demon has the capacity to be the holiest saint, at least metaphorically speaking. Our capacity is not so much for this and so much for that, like an equalizer on an old 1980s Sony boombox. It's not like this much for bass and this much for treble, this much for good, this much for evil. It's this way, both directions simultaneously and equally. Your capacity for one is your capacity for the other, and vice versa. As above, so below. The back is as big as the front. There seems to be a balance in dealing with evil. It is better to cultivate good than to expend yourself fighting the bad. But yet, when confronted with evil, we must indeed choose our response. The Buddha meditated under the Bodhi tree for 7 years. And during his meditation, Mara, who is the Buddhist version of the devil, Mara sent his 3 daughters to seduce and tempt the Buddha away from his path of Dharma. And his response was no response. He ignored them. He didn't acknowledge them at all. Just left them alone. Be on your way. On the other hand, when Jesus was fasting in the desert alone for 40 days, he was consistently tempted by the devil. And he resisted the devil and rebuked him with his wisdom and knowledge and power. And the devil left. Can't make any progress here. I'm out. Demons fled from Jesus's presence and authority, and he cast them out wherever he went and found them.
Evil is the act of intentionally lowering the awareness of another person, especially or a group of people, and especially for an agenda, for personal gain. When you lower somebody's awareness, you never negatively impact their ability to be good and do good things, to be responsible and act responsibly, to seek and gain knowledge, and to survive. And especially the last two are very important, because by altering information, you alter somebody's ability to exercise their free will, because you're actually pushing them and nudging them into a direction that you want them to go. When you do these kinds of things, it also impacts their ability to survive. So these are acts of evil because of intention, not because of an accident. And with that statement as a foundation, it's simply a matter of degree. The kid that trips another kid in school just to make them fall down so they can laugh at him, that's an act of evil. It may be on a scale, a quarter of one, but it's still an evil act. Takes you right on up to, was it Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and Hitler and Pol Pot and Stalin and all the rest of these people. This is evil. These are evil because they fall into all those. They've prevented somebody from being the best that they could. They lowered their awareness and ultimately killed millions of people. That's evil.
I think evil is real. But let's look at some examples of what I mean by evil. Rape, murder, stealing, genocide. Those are all examples of evil. It gets more personal and more subtle too. Hatred, gaslighting, divisiveness, dishonesty. These are also examples of evil. They all have one thing in common. They result from human intention. And that's a very important thing to remember as we go through this discussion. Evil, in my mind, arises solely from human intention. I know there are a lot of discussions out there about metaphysical evil. Or if God is so wise, why does he allow evil? Or there's evil in the world. Or there's temptation like it just came out of the sky. If you look at Taoism, they don't agree with that. And let me explain why a little bit. This world in Taoism is called heaven and earth. And the philosophical Taoists make no reference to any gods or any single god as an explanation for anything. They set that aside. So we only have the world that we live in, that we perceive. In the Tao Te Ching, this world, heaven and earth, is called no kin. That means heaven and earth have no relatives, which by extension means they play no favorites. If you look at the phrase, heaven and earth treat all things as straw dogs, a phrase that's often misconstrued, it means that heaven and earth don't treat anybody with any kind of special status. They're not going to intercede in your life. They're not going to fix climate change. They're not going to rescue you when you're being choked to death in an alley. Heaven and earth set the scene for this existence. They are always in movement. They're always changing. but they have no anthropomorphic consciousness. They don't do anybody any favors, but by extension, they don't condemn anybody or set anything up to be evil for any person. This world is not evil. Oh, well, are we going to say, is this world neutral? No, because you can breathe, you can drink water, you have a place to stand. When you eliminate your waste, oh, it gets recycled. This is a good world. So quite apart from any metaphysical inquiry that, oh, is evil some curse, some arrangement of existence? Not from a Taoist standpoint. In fact, from a Taoist standpoint, the world is good. Ergo, people are the ones who are the sources of evil. So evil is purely a human problem.
We live in the world of duality and everything has an opposite. So I personally think that this is a very fundamental understanding of the reality around us. And without being very philosophical about it, just as a lay person, we can see that we have, if we look at the creation, right? Because all we have in front of us, the reality that we experience has this dual nature inbuilt in it, right? So as a believer of God, I think that everything except God has an opposite. So when we see goodness in the world, the opposite of it is what we define in our human vocabulary as evil. So evil can also be understood as the opposite or absence of good. That is my understanding. And also we can say it is the negation of divine qualities and action, if we are talking from a religious, God-centric perspective. And to be very specific in terms of action on our part, it is the absence of the moral principles defined in the divine scripture or human wisdom tradition, we can say. Those absence of those moral principles from the dawn of history through many prophets, avatars, messengers of God, which were communicated to us, right? When we are acting away from those principles, I think that's where we see evil in our action in the world. In many instances, for example, how God presents the subject of evil in the Quran, and I will give some references from the Quran because I come from a Islamic tradition. So in the Quran, it is clear that evil is not necessarily just like a mythical creature. It is also a psychological state and subconscious suggestion within human mind. That is very clear from the Quranic verses. And in modern context, we understand the domain when we have a better understanding of psychology, or the domain of psychology has advanced. So this was not possible in the past, right? Hence, it's possible to understand evil's psychological dimension within human psyche nowadays that was not possible in the ancient time. And I think it's time we enrich this understanding and upgrade our comprehensive understanding of this concept. So it may be useful for us to understand evil as the negative qualities within us, such as jealousy, anger, lust, deviation from truth, unjust behavior. Those are all part of evil as we understand. So in the Quranic worldview, the psychological state of fear, arrogance, deluding oneself as invincible or grandiose sense of self, deviating from our conscience, to be stingy, pathological lying, deceiving others, manipulating others, lack of remorse, and psychopathic behavior, these are all hinted as evil that is within us.
These are questions that are so important for the human race and, in general. And especially now that we are getting so close to this time of shift. And I see that the closer we get to this time of shift, the more duality we're experiencing, in the sense that things that have been hidden from view, things that have been repressed, are now surfacing. And they need to, because what we consider the underworld. So when we're talking about evil, we're also talking about this subconscious underworld of human consciousness. It's like a collective consciousness that exists within the mind of the human race, the collective mind. And this, to me, is something that needs to be revealed. It needs to be seen for what it is. The potentials there need to be revealed, and also the darkness needs to be seen and released. So it's many different things. It's very easy to talk about good and evil as the opposites of each other. And this is an old way of looking at things. When we talk about the Garden of Eden, for instance, and talk about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge, I think, had to do with the activation of the mental faculty within humans. This was part of our evolution. This was part of our development. It was never meant to be the end point. Once we can integrate this faculty of awareness and intellect with intuition and spirit, then we can move on to the tree of life. And the tree of life is a bridge between the worlds. It's a bridge between the physical dimensions and the mental dimensions, the emotional aspects of our being, the causal aspects where the soul resides, and then beyond that, beyond time, beyond space, beyond creation, to where we can actually discover who we are as ultimate truth, as infinite consciousness. And so this tree of life, to me, is the bridge that connects these worlds together. And in the Hindu tradition, they talk about the veil of Maya. And I think this is really key to our discussion of good and evil. Because if we look at this veil as something that's bad, something that's holding us back from really experiencing who we are as divine consciousness, as an illusion, then it's only part of the picture. It's only a very partial revelation. And this leads to what we can call the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's the idea that this veil of Maya is an illusion, the idea that it's holding us back somehow. If we can get past that idea, that belief system, and understand that this veil of Maya, if we can pierce through it, is also our greatest gift. It allows us to fully experience who we are and express who we are as creator consciousness within creation. Part of duality has been this separation between these two aspects of ourselves, the creator aspect and the creating or creation aspect. But we are both. And once we can break through this veil of Maya and experience ourselves as the mother, as Shakti, as the creator, as divine light, as infinite consciousness, expressing itself, experiencing itself through these beautiful physical bodies, celebrating this beautiful planet of physical density, then we're actually able to pierce this veil and experience ourselves as fully divine and fully human together. Once that happens, my sense is we're no longer creating this duality anymore. We experience ourselves through all five bodies. We have built the tree of life within ourselves. And once that happens, we're not living in a world where we're victimized. We're not living in a world where good and evil are opposites, where we can be influenced by things that we might consider as evil. Because evil and good are reflections of what's going on inside us. It's a reflection of our own sense of who we are. And if we're stuck with the reality that begins with our personal identity and ends there, then we are in duality, then we are stuck, then we are living in veils of limitation. Once we pierce that and we begin to experience who we are through all 5 bodies. So in the Hindu tradition, they talk about the physical body, the etheric body, the emotional body, the mental body, and the causal body, which is the realm of the soul. And then once that bridge is built between these 5 bodies or koshas, then we can go beyond time and space, beyond this veil of Maya, and experience ourselves as the Divine Mother, as all there is, the I Am presence. Then evil does not bind us or limit us, because at that point, once you cross that dimension, that veil, there is no such thing as evil. Good and evil exist only within the world of duality, which is on this side of the veil. Once we pierce beyond that veil, it's not possible to see things in terms of good and evil. Then everything is simply a flow. You're either moving with the flow or you're resisting the flow. If you're moving with the flow, you're experiencing yourself as divine consciousness at play within the field of matter. If you're resisting the flow, you move into a state of victimization, which also then is the repression of our true self. And it's the world of violence and greed and fear and all the effects of that in our world today. So the conversation to me is not so much about good and evil as about really discovering who we are, piercing the veils of Maya, and becoming aware that we are all there is. There's this Hindu phrase, I am that. It's also there in Jewish mysticism, it's also there in Christianity. What does that actually mean? Some people see this as being related to the ultimate reality, to God, to the Great Mother. I am that, beyond time and space, and that is the truth. Whereas everything else then gets relegated to the world of illusion. But then that creates the split again. And when we recognize that that is this as well, this is that, all of this is all of that, then we're beyond this veil of separation. And it takes work, it takes effort. In the Kashmir Shaivism tradition, they talk about the tattvas, and there's 36 tattvas. So it's like a periodic table of elements, beginning with Shiva Shakti, infinite consciousness beyond the veil, and then moving through all these different realms and dimensions of consciousness, slowly entering into denser and denser dimensions, slowly entering into elemental qualities, the senses that we have, which are able to receive information from various dimensions, and down to the elements of ether, air, fire, earth, and water. And once we begin to experience ourselves as that in each of these elements, so I am that as this body, I'm beautifully divine, an expression of the self, expressing through physical density. This body is amazing. This life around me is beautiful. This earth, is awesome beyond measure. Then we can begin to step out of this world of, dividing ourselves into good, evil, right, wrong, where we victimize ourselves. Then we become free. Then we are divine consciousness operating through the physical body. So, there's so much more we can talk about in this theme, but that's what I would say in a nutshell. I think we can define it in so many different ways, depending on our state of consciousness and depending on what our purpose is. Are we here to celebrate this life in the best way we can? Are we here to bring spiritual consciousness into everything we are and everything we do? In that case, evil would be anything that holds us back from the full expression of who we are. And it can show up in multiple ways, in ways that are countering the forces of life. In the Inca tradition, anything that prevents the flow is hucha, or evil. And it's not evil in the sense that it's a force that's opposing the force of, opposing something that we call good. It's just that life flows in certain ways, and if you resist that flow, then it's evil. So it's a matter of definition. It's not this dualistic way of looking at the world. So once you understand that, then you can also understand entities or beings that we consider to be evil from that perspective. So Carlos Castaneda, for instance, talks about allies. And these are beings that are here to support our evolution. Sometimes they are here to trigger us, to poke us in certain ways, to force us to realize something, to understand something. And sometimes the only way we do it is through opposition and through resistance, which externalizes to people, to events, to circumstances in our lives. And once we get past the idea that there's something about them that's outside of us or that's to be labeled as evil, then it breaks its power over us. And yes, on a very dualistic level, there are entities, there are thought forms that we might consider evil. But our job right now is to begin to break through that perspective into something more holistic.
Now, we live in a very intellectual age. So let me ask an honest question, and please answer to yourself honestly. Have you intellectualized your way out of the belief in evil? Do you not believe evil is real? Do you not believe evil is happening everywhere that humans exist in this world? If that is the case, please then tell me what these examples are if they are not evil. I'll get to them in a minute. We are living in the age of the self, small s, ego, intellect, self, a sense of a separate identity away from source, God. We are self-absorbed, we are self-motivated, we are self-obsessed. We are at the brink, and in some cases we are crossed over into self-worship, where self becomes its own God. Look at the AI movement. Look at the World Economic Forum. Look at this Havari guy talking about essentially stepping into godhood. But this is in a dark way. The purest, most innocent. Here are the examples of what I'd like to ask someone who does not believe in evil. Please tell me what these are. The purest, most innocent, most impressionable members of humanity, that being young children, are being targeted by sexual perversion agendas in the United States and other countries. They're being sexualized and objectified by a media that relentlessly pushes the boundaries of what is normal and acceptable, even to the extent that there are clear agendas to normalize pedophilia and even cannibalism. Research adrenochrome, if you dare. People have defended and explained away the Dalai Lama telling a young boy admirer to suck his tongue as if it was just a cute cultural misunderstanding. The Vatican has reassigned child-abusing priests to new parishes where they continued their depravity anew on new victims. The CCP engages in forced, murderous organ harvesting and genocide of Muslim Uyghurs and Christians and Falun Gong practitioners in China. In Haiti, there are infants sacrificed in voodoo rituals and children being murdered to harvest and sell their organs abroad as well, namely to Brazil. And in Brazil and Mexico, drug cartels and gangs are torturing, flaying, and beheading people, and even posting the videos online. And perhaps worse than that, there are people who seek out those videos and watch them and get off on it. God has been enthusiastically evicted and erased from most Western culture, while materialism and science or scientism have assumed the quasi-religious status in the vacuum that was left behind. Children are tortured, murdered, and blood harvested to drink their adrenochrome. Witchcraft is at an all-time high, seemingly amongst mainly girls and women, it seems. Its greatest appeal being overwhelmingly to people who are narcissistic, manipulative, and jealous. The Saudi Arabian genocide of Yemenis has gone unmentioned in the world media. Nobody cares. The Indonesian genocide of Papua New Guinea natives who have been butchered and disemboweled by the thousands in New Guinea. I guarantee you not one viewer has ever heard that story before in the news. It's been going on for decades. They don't matter. It's not important. To the media. And to humanity, apparently. Islamist terror groups in Mali have been murdering hundreds of innocent Tuareg villagers and forcing tens of thousands to flee their homes. But you don't hear about it. China willfully exports the preliminary chemicals to Mexico, which are made into the fatal drug fentanyl, which has now killed well over 100,000 Americans just last year. After-school Satan clubs are springing up in the United States, where satanic statues to Baal and Moloch are erected at the same time that statues of the country's founders are being defaced and torn down as if they are evil. Political enemies in Myanmar are being beheaded and macheted to death in videos posted online, while innocent civilians are shot dead while just driving their motorbike down the road. I know this from personal friends I have there who witnessed it and messaged me about it. But you didn't hear about it in the news. Japanese soldiers in World War II tossed Chinese infants and newborn babies up into the air and speared them dead on bayonets as they fell. The Canadian government is currently actively promoting suicide as a wellness option for healthcare. Religious figures across the spectrum of faiths have been sexually abusing children. This includes not only Catholics who seem to own that sin in the media. It is all religions, Hindu, Jewish, it's across the board. The Mongol army centuries ago massacred millions and used their corpses as a bridge to cross the castle's moat to reach the remaining population to massacre them. And yet, Genghis Khan is celebrated as a hero. But he did that many times. Psychopaths are harming and killing innocent animals, especially in Western suburbs. Mind your squirrels, cats, and small dogs. There are those people around. It's horrible, but they exist. We live in a world where now the totalitarian globalist psychopaths, are brazenly implementing a soul-crushing system of manipulation, restriction, deception, depopulation, consciousness suppression, and complete enslavement upon an increasingly lost, disconnected, weakened humanity. I have given you enough examples, but there is no end to them. Now tell me if that isn't evil, and tell me if you still don't believe evil exists. Witchcraft, voodoo, black magic of all kinds is at an absolute all-time, historical all-time high. If you suspect you are being subjected to black magic in any way, you will find that the perpetrator, not always, but so often, is a narcissistic, manipulative, jealous female, not always female, but many times, predominantly, who is big on ambition and low on self-knowledge, craving power beyond herself, blind or apathetic to the real cost to herself and others for what she is doing. I have watched interviews with real witches practicing real black magic, and one of them was transparent and honest and open enough to say that any experienced witch knows that there is between a 3 to 10 times higher price she must pay, karmically, if you will, for sending a curse or a spell or a vex out onto somebody else. So when somebody approaches them and says, hey, I want you to do some voodoo stuff to somebody I hate, they understand that they're going to be pummeled. She said 3 to 10 times the amount they send out. And yet some people still do it. And I think that most of them do it because they crave power outside of their own sphere, and they are willing to be apathetic and blind to the consequences that await them for doing it, or they are incredibly unaware. And woe to them unless they do a 180. And instead of looking outside for greater power from other to do harm, instead they look within to the ultimate power that we are connected to and which we emanate from for the sake of doing good. I don't care if that sounds cheesy. If anyone is convicted by what I've said, that means you. If you sense that you're being affected by black magic or witchcraft of any kind, the best thing I think you can do is to put all your energy and your being into cultivating constant communion in God. I'm not really huge on religion per se, theology per se, doctrine per se, even scripture per se. What matters the most is that you are in a perpetual state of grace and harmony and connection in the divinity from which you have arisen. Cultivate constant communion in every way possible. And all the other stuff around that is peripheral and secondary. And it does matter to an extent, but without you being in a state of constant communion with God, those things are not enough on their own. And the thing about this is that evil cannot stand the divine light. And if you purify yourself and allow yourself to be purified enough for that divine light to radiate from within you, evil will find no quarter in you. It will leave. It will give up. You should avoid potentially contaminated items. The one that sticks out the most for me is the Ouija board. Please never have anything to do with any kind or version or semblance of a Ouija board ever. It's not a toy. It's astonishing that it is sold as a game for kids. Unbelievable. It is a portal. It is a giant beacon that sends out a signal of, hey, I'm wide open. Anybody out there? Come on in. Would you do that with your home? Would you open your doors and windows and leave your house, go out to town for a few hours? Would you do that to your home? Never. Would you do that to your home with your children in the home? Never. Why would you do that to your soul? Why would you do that to your being? When you engage or even have a Ouija board, even one that you scratched out on paper, your own version, any of that, it's all bad. It is a portal, and it is a giant invitation to whatever wants to come on over here and mess with me. And can you guess what types of spirits are the most willing, ready, and able to be Johnny on the spot for mischief, deception, torment, obsession, even possession? Do not ever have anything to do with them, please. If you do, burn it, get rid of it. Don't give it away. Don't put it on the curb. Destroy it, please. And I know that there are some very, very religious people who will say, oh, crystals are evil, dream catchers are evil. Every item that I do not personally understand or like, or I get the heebie-jeebies, that's evil. I understand that. I'm not in that camp, but I will say that I know that certain things can be contaminated, can be connected with evil. What I would say is used or antique mirrors, I would avoid. And any item that might have been fixated upon by somebody you don't know, or very much possessed by and attached to someone in the past that you don't know. Just be careful, discern things, go with your gut feeling. And I think that some things can be impure, but are not necessarily always impure. For example, crystals, dream catchers, etc. But I think that what matters is something's origin, where it came from, whose it was, maybe things like that, and the way that you use it or what you intend for it. So that's all I'll say about those things. A topic that's very relevant to evil is sin. Now, I know that many people hate that term. Oh, that's a very Christian-centric term. There's no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as punishment for sin, all that Christian doctrine, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Everyone is entitled to their own take on things, but I will offer an insight on what sin means, just for the sake of hopefully a clearer understanding when we're speaking of it. Sin is a term that essentially means being off target, off center, out of the divine flow and alignment of things, going against or contrary to the way of life and goodness. That's what sin means. Paramahansa Yogananda said sin is like poisoned honey. And what he meant was that some sin is tempting, and seems sweet at the moment, but then we are contaminated by it. It sickens us and separates us further from well-being. Christ consciousness, also called the Buddha nature, same thing. That is the divine self within. That is our Christ consciousness. That is our Buddha nature. It is divine self within us, that divine spark from which we emanate and which we resonate and which ultimately somehow beyond my own understanding, we are. Now, what happens is that's the Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, the Christ in you, okay? But the Antichrist is the ego intellect. When the ego intellect usurps the throne of soul and takes over running your life and your being and how you function. If you're living up here, this is Antichrist. If you're living from here, this is Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, okay? So you can think of the Antichrist as someone who is living from and identifying with and even as their ego intellect. They've been hijacked by a component of their own being, okay? Now, let me see where I left off here. The world hails the intellect. Awards and accolades and titles galore for intellectual people and intellectual things. While in the meantime, it leaves the true nobility of being, of the soul, unacknowledged, not important to the world. So that's why we are in the world, but must not be of the world. We're here, but we're not belonging to that system. That's what that means, okay? It is the realm of the ego intellect that we go away from true understanding, where thoughts can be deceptive and misconstrued, even though we can't see it. And thoughts in your head are mostly not yours. They are received. Your brain is a transceiver. Your thoughts are mostly not even yours, and they can be sent or placed, planted, suggested. And that is the battleground of evil within humanity.
Now, what do you do if evil comes to visit you? You have to stand up. You always have to defend against evil. There is no such thing as capitulating to evil, because all that will happen is evil will devour you. When you meet bad people who want to hurt you, you must not let that happen. Let me ask any of you out there who might be parents, or who might be the children of parents. Speaking of kin, would you want any of your kin to be hurt? Would you want your child to be hurt? Would you want to see your parents hurt? So you would stop it, wouldn't you? And so we can never capitulate to evil. But there's a way to deal with that. Do you have to stand up and fight? Maybe. But the better thing to do is to evade it. So if you don't have to stand up and block it yourself or shield someone, could you sidestep it? And that's the better way to cope with evil. Now, let me mention one value that might be a little bit more challenging in terms of a response to evil. You have to have compassion. Because I guarantee you, for every evil person you encounter, you're also meeting someone in incredible pain, someone who undoubtedly was abused themselves, and someone who, for perhaps some misguided reason, thought that behaving selfishly was the right thing. And so that doesn't mean you have to fix them or rescue them per se. But you do have to understand that they are human beings like you, and their evil is a result of many, many misguided moments. If you do have a chance to demonstrate good against evil, that would be not destroying them and trying to arrange for reconciliation, except, of course, in the most difficult cases. So think about all those questions. Someone who's evil has been led astray, if you will. And as a sidebar discussion, can I point out how much in our society inadvertently encourages selfish thinking? Oh, get it for yourself. Make as much money for yourself. Oh, don't help him. He's not going to help you. It was so hard to get. Why should you give it away to somebody else? Why do you care about somebody else? These are all presented to us as normal kinds of thoughts. We're told to make as much money as possible. Hey, if you can talk someone into buying your product, great. Now, can you do it a million more times? Don't those all encourage that same problem of a selfish intention? In fact, we have validated that in our academia. Economists say everyone does everything out of self-interest. So they have ratified that as part of their theory. If you grow up with that message, that your self-interest is the most important thing, then you're not far from the next step, which is to commit some act which gets you a special kind of advantage to somebody else's detriment, and that's the beginning of evil. What do we do about evil? Because I'm going to give you another assertion that might be controversial. Everybody has good and evil in them. Everybody. And you cannot tell me that there was a moment in which you didn't stop to consider, what can I get out of this? Or how about I don't help this person? Or what if I just tell this little lie and then I won't have an argument with my spouse? Or I'm too tired to deal with my kids, so I'm just going to tell them anything. How many times has that happened? And because I've defined evil as a question of intention, we all have had those moments in which we have had to choose between the selfish thing to do, and sometimes it's the right thing to do to be selfless. So we can never stop monitoring ourselves and understanding how evil does live in every one of us, and it cannot be expunged. I will not pretend to you that there's some magic formula that says, oh, you're 100% pure and good and all that kind of stuff. That's not inherently possible. Oh, you might say, well, look at the wise men on the mountain. Yeah, look at them. They live in a nice temple on a mountain. They only see who they want to see. They're surrounded by acolytes. That's pretty easy, isn't it? That's an example, though. You have to arrange your life so that evil is remote from you. You have to defend against it. So there's no such thing as saying, oh, yeah, I can just, walk the streets and party all night and, hang out with friends and so on, and I'm going to be able to be vigilant against evil. You need to put yourself in a situation in which evil is minimized. What do we do about evil? And I think the hardest thing to do is to accept it. And when it's possible, to forgive. In Taoism, they don't say forgiveness per se, they call it mercy, but that's the same thing. And the big challenge in the Tao Te Ching is this. The sage helps the good person and the sage helps the not good person. Well, wait, isn't that everybody? I have to be good to everyone? I have to be good to the bad people too? And the answer is yes. Now, that takes a lot of strength. That takes a lot of wisdom. That takes a wide breadth of character. But that's why we practice. So we can get to that point where we can help both the good people and the not good people. I hope it's not too depressing, but let's not pretend that evil can be solved. We have these phrases all the time in popular speeches, the war to end all wars. We're going to eradicate all evil. We're going to eradicate this, blah, 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 blah. It makes a great speech, but it's impossible because people will always be born with those two sides, self-interest and interest in the collective. And I would submit to you that this is the real task of life, to come to a resolution between the individual and the collective. And the best thing to do is to participate in the collective by contributing your individual genius and specialness. It doesn't follow that you try to milk from the collective benefits just for yourself. So evil is real. Evil exists. It's a human quality. We need to leave gods and nature out of it and concentrate on ourselves. We need to understand that all of us have good and evil in us. And that means we have to be vigilant about eliminating it from ourselves, from our thoughts, from our motivations, from our actions. And we need to accept it in other people, defend against it when it's a drastic situation, but when the situation is calmer and we have that ability, we need to extend compassion and forgiveness.
does evil exist as an energy? I don't think so. I think that love exists as an energy, and that evil flourishes in the absence of love, just like darkness exists when there's no light. It's the same thing. But evil people certainly exist, and evil entities certainly exist. And I've had some very unpleasant experiences, and I know you have too. And there are humans who were evil when they're alive, and after their body has died, they haven't changed that personality. And they live in a shadow world that's right adjacent to the dimension that we live in. And they have the ability to influence people's thinking. They will basically jerk people's chain because it's fun. It's fun for them. And do evil entities exist? Yes, absolutely, without doubt. These entities, though, they come from a different place. They were never human. And these entities have the ability to impact people's thinking and to impact how they live. And when they can create emotions like anger and hate and sadness, they feed on that. It's actually food for them. We're like milk cows to them.
Now that we have a perspective on evil, we can look at it from many different angles. You can look at it from a unitive perspective, or you can look at it from a very dualistic perspective, and they're all real. So we can focus on more of the dualistic aspects. There's evil entities, there's beings that are malevolent. They can be very oppressive at times. They can shut down our physical bodies and our emotional systems to whatever extent we give them permission. So the question is, how do we give them permission to do this? How are they able to create an agreement or a contract with us on a certain level? It may not be on a soul level, but it is on a personality level, perhaps. Maybe something to do with shadows that we are not able to acknowledge. Or maybe it's something beyond that. Maybe there's lineages. There's such a thing as black magic, which has to do with, casting spells or aspersions. So it's a mysterious world, and I don't pretend to understand everything. But I do know that there are entities that can hassle people, and it's important to know how to deal with this. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was an exorcist. And so, she lived a lot of her life in fear of these entities because she had witnessed them, and somehow even being an exorcist as he was and working with the light, things happened in the house that were very scary for her, for my mother. So I know these things are real.
Yes, I believe so. At least my understanding from the Quran as divine scripture do point to this direction. Is it black and white? Should I permanently label a person evil? Absolutely not, because I think this is a tendency or a particular whispering in our mind which can come and go. So a person can be evil in this moment and they may not be in the next moment. For that question, I would like to understand the word literally in this context, the language of the scriptures, right? I continue referring back my answer to the scriptures because to me, they are source of wisdom. I may discard everything in the religion, but I personally believe and have observed that what our religious tradition has offered to us, if I went away to the Himalayas and meditated for 40 years, probably I would rediscover the same truth that religious tradition, spiritual traditions discovered, right? So I see it as a continuation of wisdom, human wisdom. Just like in science, we improve based on what our past scientists have accumulated, right? In terms of knowledge and wisdom. Similarly, in the spiritual tradition or religious tradition, we have certain knowledge that is transferred to us, certain wisdom transferred to us. And I feel it will be foolish on humanity's part to discard the experience of Buddha, discard the wisdom of Jesus, or discard what was communicated through Muhammad, right? So for me, it's important to deal with a subject like evil, which is necessarily a religious philosophical concept, right? So that's why I tend to go back to the scriptures. And what is important for me to understand this subject is the language of the scripture of the past. When these concepts were communicated, they used a different mental model to define such concepts. And in our modern time, if we continue to use the same mental model and language structure, it can produce cognitive dissonance. So by cognitive dissonance, I mean it will create conflict in our belief system within us, because as a modern human being in this world where religion has lost its relevance, maybe its power and relationship in our life, in modern people's life, and same goes for spirituality. Many people in the world don't bother about those truths, right? Because it's much more important to earn money, pay the mortgage, pay the bill, raising a family and all those things. So those have become in our background. But sometimes we do face this reality, like what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of everything, right? Whether there is evil in the world. Do I believe in evil? That kind of question do haunt us back, because it is very much ingrained in our cellular level memory, in our spiritual memory. Because in the very beginning of, from the very beginning of dawn of civilization, when human started to understand this world and himself, this question did haunt us. Like, what's the meaning of all this? What is there beyond the sky in the nighttime, right? So what I'm trying to say is the mental models that we have developed, I believe if we keep insisting on understanding such concept using the past mental models, let's say of the Bible, of the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, it will cause cognitive dissonance. So because the mental models are explanation of how something works, they describe the reality to us, right? So for example, if I look at the parables that Jesus used to use to communicate with the people of his time, he used parables which were simple for the simple-minded fishermen or the farmers. Those were mental models that was useful to them, right? So for us, I think the mental models which were sufficient in ancient time, when our understanding of the world was less advanced, may not be so useful to us in this time. Hence, if we use the same language or the models to understand evil, it may not help. In fact, it will push away people and rejecting the reality. I want to see such things as part of the reality which is metaphysical. These are topics which are not necessarily of this physical world, right? So we had a tendency to imagine things in a very anthropomorphic way. Like we want to imagine devil or Satan as if it's a human being, is wrestling God. Even we have imagined God as a human being, right? But this understanding was very primitive. I think it is possible to reinterpret evil as our psychological tendencies that is present within us. Yes, it has a metaphysical reality, which probably none of us can accurately describe, right? I cannot accurately describe a fruit found in Amazonian forest that I never saw. My nation never saw. I don't have a language for it. I never tasted it, right? So it is very difficult to describe how that fruit or that particular object is. That can tell us that a metaphysical reality that is happening in the unseen world, in terms of evil or the representation of evil, like in the biblical Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition, we call it shaitan or Satan or devil, and they represent the qualities which now we say evil. So for me, those are metaphysical reality, and it's difficult to how to say grasp with our understanding of this physical reality. So coming back to that question is, I do personally believe that evil is real, and to just not say that this is a belief, where, as I said, that everything has an opposite. So just using that particular how to say way of describing the reality, that I know that okay, there is night and there is day, there is hot and there is cold. These hints tell me that if there is a good, the absence of good is what we define as evil. But this may translate to, but when I say that evil is literally real, it may translate to someone else differently, because the mental model they carry mostly related to evil being an anthropomorphic imagination.
And how do you know? How do you know if this is happening? Because pay attention to your thoughts and your reaction to your own thoughts, or to thoughts, because they may not be your own. But a thought comes into your mind, and people play with it. I've often said the easiest thing and most difficult thing to do is to control our own mind. It's our mind, yet we are not taught how to exercise control over it. And the idea of that seems ridiculous until you really look at what's going on. And so what I would say to people is, a thought comes into your mind that's negative or upsetting, and you start to play with it, and you get your self-justification and your righteousness going and all that to interact with that thought. Now pay attention to your emotions. You find yourself getting upset, my guess is some entity's having a snack at your expense.
So being ensnared by evil in this context, being affected by evil in this context, would be where we lose our ability to see the big picture, to maintain who we are as one with the flow of life. When we see ourselves as separate from the flow of life, then we are already trapped in this web of illusion, which we could call evil. So the Native American people, the Aboriginal people, all the indigenous people always speak about this web of life, the interactive web, which holds all things together. This beautiful movie, Avatar, was a reflection of that consciousness. Avatar 1 and Avatar 2.
I think when we ignore the metaphysical laws of God, the system of life is created in such a way that we'll fall back and be affected by evil. So as we know that this universe is created with some physical laws, similarly there are metaphysical laws. So when we deviate from those laws, the system or the matrix or the creation is such that we will be affected by evil and eventually we will suffer. So in my worldview, the world is full of signs of God, right? Literally. And if we can develop the proper vision and hearing through a clean heart, through our conscience, we can see and hear God's sign that can guide us.
So the best way to deal with evil is, I think, simply to look for the big picture whenever possible. So when you're lost in a world where you feel limited, trapped, or victim of circumstances, how can we reshift our perspective to be able to embrace more and more of truth? So it's really a matter of discernment. It's also a matter of breaking through our mental ideas and belief systems. And how this happens, at least for me, is to develop a relationship with the spirit of life. Whether we call it the Great Mother, whether we call it Great Spirit, whether we call it the Father, whether we call it God, the universe, but developing a relationship with this. The Sufis refer to this as the beloved, the friend. But a relationship is one where you don't see yourself as separate and you don't see yourself as a victim. You see yourself as an equal, and you see yourself as one who has power in the situation based on identity. If I experience myself as divine, then I can express that and reflect that in my world. If I see myself as separate, if I see myself as a victim, I'm going to reflect that in my world. And then I'll label it as something evil, because evil is always external to myself. That's the way we like to think of it. Something outside of me is forcing me to be something or do something. And my reaction to that defines this relationship where I'm a victim and someone else is a perpetrator.
For people who've had some training with the mind, I would say just let those thoughts pass through you, just like movie credits at the end of the show. Don't engage. If you have trouble with that, if you're not able to just let it go, then what I do is I count mentally, and I picture 1, 2, 3 in my mind. I'll count up to 20, although I've never had to go past about 8. Or you start at 100 and count backwards, because it requires more concentration. And what this does is it forces you to be in present time. It forces you to take control of your mind, because you're taking control of the mental imagery and you're taking control of the voice, and you're owning it. And when you start doing that, you'll find that your mind will settle right down, and that you won't have those thoughts anymore until the next ones come. And then you do it again. So, and if you're looking for a meditation exercise, I would say sit in a low light room, not dark, but a low light room with a single candle, especially on a taper type of candle, and focus your thoughts on the candle. Use it like a mandala, and just focus your thoughts on the candle. And every time a thought comes into your mind, simply release it, because that candle is helping you stay in present time. I think on a simplistic way, that kind of answers a lot of it, because we're looking at a way to not have evil in our lives. We're looking for a way to not have it connect with us. And you have to take control of your own mind. And our prisons and our mental health institutions are filled with people who have done atrocious things, because that voice in my mind made me do it. Well, that wasn't their voice. It wasn't them. It was an outside entity causing that person distress and upset and violence, and to create fear in the community. And meanwhile, those evil entities are all having a banquet at the human's expense. Now, some of these people are just plain nuts. They're psychotic, whatever. There's some kind of mental defect, and they just don't have the ability to live in harmony with society. That's true. But how many of them are like that because of an outside entity? And our mental health professionals are not trained or even have the ability to deal with spiritual issues. And so people get locked up. And I think that it's a shame that those lives are wasted, but they're going to have to live out their life and recycle, so to speak, and see what happens next time around.
I think it is by taking refuge in the real, taking refuge in God. From time immemorial, the highest possible imagination people had was the imagination of God. It is the imagination of the absolute. It is the refuge. So the refuge in the absolute, the refuge in the highest, is what can move us away from evil, because evil is the darkness. It is the pettiness. It is the small part of us, and the opposite is the vastness, the greatness of God, the greatness of our own being, the light within us. So if we can take refuge in it, that is one of the best way to deal with evil from affecting us. I'm reminded here of the saying of Jesus when he said, become as wise as serpent and as innocent as doves. So by being on our guard against men who become playground of evil is how we can get away and best deal with it.
The question is, if that happens, if we are under attack, how do we deal with it? I would say there are certain prayers, incantations, mantras that do help because it is a vibrational thing. If there's certain masters and angelic guides or beings that you feel particularly connected with who are in the higher dimensions of light, seeking their assistance and support. Recognizing if it's a matter of projection. So sometimes what we perceive as external could actually be projections of our own shadow. All right, so if that is so, recognizing that, owning that, and releasing that. Oftentimes it's not, oftentimes it's external, and recognizing when that happens. There are people who are trained for this. Many of the clergy, for instance, in many different traditions, who know how to work with this, who know how to release spells cast by someone else. This is a world where there can be a lot of duality. Many shamans are trained to work with dark entities as well as light entities. So it's not just, one side of things. So if someone is experiencing attack, it can affect the body, it can affect internal organs, it can affect your vitality, your life force, it can affect your access to your own spirit. So I would say just take time to create a shield of light around yourself, whatever ways you might want to do it, through your own tradition, whatever tradition that might be, Christian, Catholic, or Hindu, Buddhist, New Age, Celtic, Native American, Aboriginal. There are ways that work. Ally with elemental spirits, the spirits of water, especially water and earth and fire. Fire element helps to cleanse, water element helps to release, earth element tends to strengthen. So those elemental energies, being in nature, provides a way for those elemental energies to work with you, support you. Spending time in nature, doing cleansing, detoxification work, as well as cleansing the body through enemas, through the right foods, spending a lot of time with water, taking baths with Epsom salts or cell salts. So there are simple things, working with naturopathic support that you can do, homeopathic things, flower essences, because it's a subtle energy field that's very close to the physical dimension. So it's in the astral worlds, but not so far away from the physical worlds that you can't access it. And when you're working with the elemental spirits, when you're working with the etheric body, you can help clear the physical body and the emotional body in such a way that you're able to release the effect, the deleterious effect of these entities upon you. There's depossession work that can be done. That it takes a trained person to do this. It's very much about not going into fear yourself when you encounter this, whether it's for someone else or in yourself. Now, if I were to experience something like this, the most important thing would be to not go into fear. Okay, it's a nuisance, but that doesn't mean it's scary. If I'm in fear, that increases the hold that this entity has over me, because the hold of this entity is through fear and is through whatever unresolved issues I might be projecting onto someone else. If I can integrate those issues within myself to the extent that I don't need to go into fear, that I can trust the universe, that I can trust something beyond myself to support and hold and heal and release. That is always helpful. If you can have a personal relationship with whatever you consider your divine source, that helps. So there are things you can do which help, and it doesn't have to take long. It's not like you have to go through years of, or even weeks or months of it. Can, the moment you are really clear that you're done with this obsession, you demand your freedom, you claim your victory, you hold your sovereignty in a way that's really clear. It's like, it's a ripple of force that moves out from your inner being. That's clear and direct. That itself creates a tsunami force that will begin to sweep out unwelcome entities. And it's something you can do every day. You can create a pyramid of light around your space. There's work you can do with certain mantras and yantras. But if you can really build a sphere of light within your space where you can retreat to over and over again in support, with support from positive light forces, that's one thing you can do to really support your healing.
So real quick, how to keep this out of a society? I teach the 5 values of civilization. So it starts with respect. If there's respect, now there's truth. With truth and respect, or those two, you can have trust. If you have respect, truth, trust, you can now have cooperation, and those make a solid foundation for love. That becomes the foundation of a human being's life, of a family's life. If you have a family that lives by those values, they're a strong family, and strong families are the bedrock of a society. And without those values, we may be technologically advanced, but we won't be civilized. And my last thought is, you can't fight the darkness, but you can turn on the light.
From a practical perspective, I think there are things we can do to shift from victim to oneness, shift from being separate to being in service, to see ourselves as part of the whole. And every time we do that, we're breaking out of the tree of knowledge, good and evil, into the tree of life, which pierces all dimensions, where you experience yourself as who you are. Infinite consciousness, expressing itself and celebrating itself through everything in creation.
I would say that evil works through ignorance. The more we become mindful, aware, insightful, knowledgeable, even knowledge about myself, which is very important, that is how we can come in contact with our dark side, with the evil possibilities that are within me. When I grow in wisdom, the less and less chance evil will have within our heart and mind to play tricks with. Hence, my offering from personal experience and journey is that we never stop in deepening our knowledge of God. When I say knowledge of God, I also mean knowledge of our own self, because we all have that divine spark within us. So to me, God is the only reality worth knowing. So when I know myself, I am knowing God. Whatever we know, whether we study the nature, whether I study the ocean, whether I study the cosmos, we end up knowing the will of God. And just like in the Lord's Prayer, that thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, it's not just that statement in a prayer. When we say thy will be done, it is important for us to understand that will, that divine will, and that divine will continues to manifest through us, through the world, through the people around us, right? So in every single moment, this divine will is manifesting, is unfolding. So the more we understand that divine will, the better we become equipped to move away from evil and to be closer to our light. So by being very sincere to our path, whether it's a religious path, spiritual path, or secular path, if we become sincere, if we truly believe what we believe and act upon it by drawing consciously inspiration through signs in the universe, in the world, we can grow in wisdom. And those who are neither fond of religious or spiritual path, for them to practice compassion, love for humanity and the self, and to act wise. These are the way that we can overcome evil. That is what I believe. And finally, and very lastly, if I come back to the Quranic worldview, we have few hints there, direct hints to overcome the evil. One is to through remembrance of God. So one of the sign of evil is it will make people forget God. So the remedy is to remember God. And how can we remember God? Through meditation, prayer, and being close to nature. Because nature is a direct manifestation of the divine. It is, if we get close to it, because many of us are disillusioned in our institutional religion, which is a reality of our time. So for them, the language of the religion is probably dead. And for them to be close to the nature, to be mindful is one of the best way. To be in constant touch with the truth of life and the truth of reality is another. And to be vigilant or mindful of one's own being is very important. So we can apply various tools that the sacred traditions have offered us, such as mindfulness, prayer, meditation, reading the scripture with open heart and mind. And this world is a great classroom, and we are its student as well as its teacher. So we can learn from our own self. Hence, if we contemplate on our own life, our actions, they can help us grow. We can rediscover things that cause suffering in our life in the past. We can rectify those and avoid those. And through doing so, we can avoid what is evil as well.
Now, you know I love quotes, and usually I offer quotes because they reinforce and affirm the points and the principles that we are sharing. But in this case, at least with the first couple of quotes, I am not necessarily doing that. I am simply putting them out there as an alternative view for your open consideration. Whether you accept them, reject them, absorb them, or dismiss them, that's all you. You have the free will. Now, I happen to love Dolores Cannon, but here's a quote that I'm not going to embrace wholeheartedly, but I'm going to share with you. She says, "There is no such devil sitting on people's shoulders telling them to do this or that. On this side, we have no concept of evil because evil is merely a disharmony between the two forces. And this has been given the term evil in order for your human conscious mind to be able to comprehend this disharmony. Please understand there is no incarnate evil. There is no such thing as a Satan that is walking the earth and snatching the souls from people. This is a fallacy and a story which was created in order to understand disharmony." In my opinion, this is an overly intellectualized view. However, I have not a fraction of the experience in dealing with the other side and spirit that Dolores Cannon had, and I acknowledge that my understanding could be wrong, but I do not embrace this one with the thrill that I do with other quotes. But in fairness to the discussion, offering views for your consideration and to help clarify your stance and your understanding, I have included that quote. Now, I will say we can't blame everything on the devil. Devil made me do it. That's nonsense. You are always the key. You are the pendulum, everything. You are the crux. Everything hinges on you and your choice of free will, conscious or unconscious, intended or intended, right or wrong. Evil can only do so much with you if you don't participate and play the game. Now, this next quote is from Lara, who is the admin of the Dolores Cannon Facebook page. This one is very interesting, but you may or may not embrace all of it, and I'm not insinuating that you should or that you shouldn't. Here's what she wrote. I'm going to dispel some popular misconceptions. God is real. God is pure consciousness. It is the consciousness that resides in all energy. Everything in existence is God, experiencing a different perspective. You are God. I am God. Everything you can see is God, and everything you cannot see is God. Angels are real. They are beings of light that reside in the higher dimensional planes. They do occasionally lower their frequency to come down to our level to deliver messages. They are non-physical celestial beings that are immortal. They're not omniscient, and they do not answer to any specific deity. Demons are also real. They are a form of elemental. They are mostly thought manifestations, also called tulpas. Most commonly of our nightmares. Negative thoughts, energy, emotions, beliefs, actions, all come together in a thick soup of negative energy. That's how you make a demon. Or you can call one to you. Possessions happen when you match frequencies with whatever entity you're manifesting or dealing with. It does not have a soul. It's created by people with souls, though. When you raise your frequency, you can see everything below your frequency, which means in order to see fairies, you also have to see demons. There's the duality. ETs, extraterrestrials or interstellar beings or aliens, whatever you want to call them, have learned to ignore demons. If you hold a high vibrational frequency, they cannot do anything to you. That I will totally embrace. So seeing them as a 5D being, it's kind of like seeing yet another harmless animal. That's the mentality you need to adopt. They're harmless if you are in a state of grace and high frequency and connectivity in God, I will add. They are harmless, and even if you can see them, you're safe. Fear is what they feed off of, yes. If you don't have fear, they will either ignore you or flee. Now again, do what you will with that quote. It's a long quote, a lot of information. Now, Peter Kreeft wrote, he was speaking of Tolkien and Tolkien's works. And he says, Tolkien believes that there's a little good in the worst of us and a little bad in the best of us, but not that there's a little good in evil and a little evil in good. He believes in human moral complexity, but not in logical moral complexity. That's Peter Kreeft. Another quote by Susie Kassem. He who creates darkness can also be awakened to create illumination. He who spreads fear can also be shaken to spread comfort. Any problems created by the left hand of man can also be solved with the right, for he who manifests anything also has the ability to destroy it. What I like about that quote is it puts it all on us. As I said before, we either allow or participate with any evil that is affecting us in our life in some way or another. It might not be conscious, but once it is brought to consciousness, it then must be released, forgiven, dismissed, cleansed, purified. I can't overemphasize the importance of perpetual purification. Now, ignorance does not make us immune. It makes us vulnerable. And that's part of the reason why we're discussing evil here today, because a lot of this stuff is unknown to people. We just don't know. And again, I'm not in any way attempting or claiming to resolve evil in this episode. We are discussing it, considering things about it, sharing about it, so that we can deal with it more appropriately, not cope with it, respond to it. So ignorance does not make us immune. It makes us vulnerable. We don't want to be ignorant. What did Jesus say? Be gentle as lambs and wise as serpents. It is our responsibility to learn and know and understand. And we can stray into evil whenever we lose our connection to God, spirit, self, family, nature, and community. When we enter into disconnectivity, evil has an inroad. Terry Pratchett says, evil begins when you begin to treat people as things. That's a result of disconnection from source, divine love, all of it, community, family, and self and nature. The Greek philosopher Thucydides says, love of power, operating through greed and personal ambition, was the cause of all these evils. That's when we begin to crave power outside of ourselves or beyond ourselves. In a way, we want to be a god, or we want to be God. Of course, not with all the moral responsibilities and all that. We just want the power. Well, that is a guaranteed path to evil within us. And although it is not enough, the absolute bare minimum we can do in response to evil is to simply have no part in it. Now, that does not mean apathy. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who I love, said, the simple step of a courageous individual is to not take part in the lie. You can apply that to a lot in the world today, by the way. But we mustn't think our uninvolvement is enough, because it isn't, especially in the world we are witnessing today. We must not only not participate, but also not ever passively, apathetically, or fearfully allow evil in our lives, our homes, and our communities. We must not be spiritual and moral pushovers, mere cowards, paralyzed by the fear of standing alone when it is necessary, being opposed, being rejected, being ridiculed, or being persecuted. If we fear consequences to the extent that it paralyzes us, then we are already captive to the evil before us. Sometimes it is indeed a great honor to be spit upon. But the pathetic, paralyzed cowardice that we see in the majority of people today is all the ground that evil requires to advance further in seizing control and destroying all that it infects. And be assured, it will swallow up all that we, in our apathy, allow it to. As Charles Bukowski says, what matters most is how well you walk through the fire. 130 years ago or so, John Stuart Mill said, let not anyone pacify his conscience by the delusion that he can do no harm if he takes no part and forms no opinion. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. He is not a good man who, without a protest, allows wrong to be committed in his name, and with the means which he helps to supply, because he will not trouble himself to use his mind on the subject. And as Reverend Bob Belcher says, in the same spirit, in the situation before us, there can be no neutrality. One either works for the light or works for the darkness. Neutrality is tacit agreement with evil. That is powerful and true. True and timely as all that is, still yet, ultimately, it is actually better and more effective to cultivate and propagate what is good than it is to fight and oppose what is bad. There's a very thin line there, but a very tremendously different outcome. Rather than railing against what's evil and bad, propagate and cultivate and promote all that is good, and it will eclipse it and outshine it. It'll burn it away. Therefore, we must love God more than we hate evil. Rabia al-Basri said, I love Allah. I have no time in which to hate the devil. And George Gurdjieff said to his daughter in a letter, if you are meditating and a devil appears, make the devil meditate too. And I will close my segment with a quote by Plato. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light.